All right. So we are live here in the Philip Duff Show. I'm delighted to be reprising our Sake and Shochu Mixology seminar from Bar Convent, Berlin last year with the one and only Kenta Goto. Kenta, good morning. How's things?
Hey, good morning, Philip.
We only said we'd tape this as a podcast and a YouTube in October last year, and it is now halfway through February. So I think we're doing quite well, actually. I was really busy in October, November, and December. What was it like in the bars?
Yeah, Bud's been doing great, and finally we came out of the pandemic, and then it is great to see that people are coming back.
And you've got two busy bars, one in Manhattan, one in Brooklyn, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
and Barclay Center started doing a bunch of events. Berkeley Nets have been doing great, so it will definitely help our business.
I'm glad to hear it. I'm glad to hear it. So the way this seminar goes, if you're watching or listening, is that I'm going to do the history and background of sake and shochu, and then I'm going to hand over to Kenta, and he's going to take you through his theories of mixology with those ingredients, which differ quite a lot from the standard template. Unfortunately, Kenta has come up with a whole new template for creating cocktails using sake and shochu, which is very exciting. It's kind of cool if you can see the visual, but we'll try our best to describe it if you're listening on audio only. All right, so I'm going to start sharing my screen now so that we can start off. There we go. Lovely. So, believe it or not, sake started off as mouth-chewed sake, and you can make this at home if you want to. Just get a load of rice and chew it and then spit it into a bucket and leave it for a few days, and it will ferment because the world is full of airborne yeast, and it will make something that is lightly alcoholic. This was a religious thing. It was first adopted by the Shinto religion and then the Buddhists. And some reports say that you could get mouth-chewed sake served at temples in Japan into the 1950s. And this is by no means a unique tradition. There's mouth-chewed ferments and distillates from South America, where people would be mouth-chewing corn, for instance, and using that to make some kind of a lightly alcoholic liquid. That was 1000 BC, so it was really old. By it's always a thing about advancing your slides, isn't there? There we go. Koji arrived around 400 AD in Japan. It's hard to give us an exact date. We're going to be talking a lot about koji. Koji is kind of the magic ingredient in both sake and shochu and awamori. What koji is a mold, a fungus called Aspergillus oryzae, and it allows you to have dual fermentation along with yeast. It produces citric acid, and it also produces tons of flavor. So we'll go into that in depth a bit later on. We have, by 715 AD, the first record of sake being brewed with koji. So now it's all beginning to fall a bit into place. We've gone from mouth-chewed sake to koji coming into the mix, and now we've got sake brewing for sure with koji. So that is sake brewed with yeast and koji. From about 800 AD on, sake resembled something we would recognize today. And once more, we're grateful to the priests. The Nara priests invented sake as you and I would recognize it today. They polished the rice, they filtered the product of fermentation, and they pasteurized. Now, I don't know if you've checked out the numbers here, but this is 800 AD, right? By 1568, there was documentation of pasteurization. That's 296 years before Louis Pasteur gave his name to the process. So those Nara priests and sake makers really knew what they were doing. It's incredible to think that almost 300 years before it was accepted in the Western world, this was happening in Japan. Amazing, amazing stuff. So onwards and upwards. Polishing rice is integral to sake production. And the polishing ratio tells you what's being removed. So if you have a 60% rice polishing rate, for instance, for Junmai Jinjoshu, that means that 40% of the outer husk of the rice has been removed. And you can think about this a little bit like heads and tails for distilling. If you know about distilling, the first bit of liquid that comes off the still is usually very bad. Then there's a center cut, a heart cut, that's really good. That's what you want. And then as you get towards the end of the run, it gets bad again. The art of making great distillates is working out when the flavor of the first bit, the heads, is beginning to be acceptable. So it's actually contributing and not nasty. And also knowing when the end of the heart cut is diminishing, keeping the good stuff and not taking away too much. So if you have Honjozushu sake, that means that 30% of the rice grain has been polished away. Now, we can go into this at huge depth, but we do want to make this a reasonably short seminar and also get to the meat of it, which is Kenta's ideas on mixology. So moving on, how do you make sake? Well, first of all, you rest the rice, you soak it, then you steam it to heat it up, and you cool it down. This so far is very similar to if you're using any other ingredients. But then koji enters the mix, as it were. Now, there are 3 types of koji. The most traditional one is yellow koji. It gives a generally fruity, delicious, sophisticated taste. Black koji was actually a mutation from yellow koji, and it began appearing around 1910. And it gives depth and complexity, funkiness. White koji is a much more recent innovation, and it gives out gentle, subtle flavors. White koji was something that really wouldn't have been possible until you were able to air condition and refrigerate and make truly hygienic breweries and distilleries. Yellow koji and black koji are much more powerful, but white koji allows you degrees of delicate flavor that would be almost impossible. And as we said, koji helps ferment. It does it in a way, a dual fermentation. It supplies enzymes to convert starch into sugar, and it supplies a lot of citric acid. Now, the citric acid contributes to the eventual product, of course, but it also means that the mash won't get infected. A lot of Japan and a lot of the places where sake and shochu are made is really warm, tropical, humid. So the koji is actually helping prevent the mash from getting infected by bacteria. And of course, flavor. So this is a close-up look at some koji, some of the aspergillus mold that's been propagated. So what do I mean by propagated? Well, you know what mold looks if you've ever shared a house with a few bartenders or indeed a couple of slovenly people. You leave something in the fridge too long and you go back and there's this, you know, fluffy, hairy thing growing on your leftovers. So essentially the same idea, except this is a specific strain. And what you have to do is inoculate it. You have to give koji something to live off, a host, if you will. And as you know, if you've gone away on a trip and come back, mold can grow on anything in your house or in your fridge. Any source of nutrition, be it starch or sugar, is fine. Most koji is actually grown on rice. You get rice grains, you inoculate them with koji, you literally sprinkle koji over them, and you wait for the koji to grow and get larger. That's what propagation means. But it doesn't have to be rice that koji grows on. It could be barley, for instance, or any other grain. Most things will provide a host for koji. And you let the koji grow and propagate in what's called a koji room. You're looking at one right now. It's lined with all these special shallow boxes. And the koji love to be at about 36 degrees Celsius. No lower than 30, and above 45, it tends to kill them off a bit. But the sweet spot is 36 degrees Celsius. And then you've got a load of propagated koji, and it's time to take the next step. This is what's called the Sokujimoto method of sake. There are other methods, but again, we're going at a fair clip here, and we want it to be 101 level, assuming that you don't know a huge amount about sake and shochu production. So basically, you add the koji, the water, lactic acid and yeast in a very controlled way. So for instance, with this method, you mix a rice mix, which is rice, koji, and water, and the shubo with lactic acid and yeast in a very precise proportion, right? And that's day one. In day three, you add some more of the rice mix to feed it. And then on day four, you add even more of the rice mix. The sake that comes out of this fermentation is going to be 17 to 20% ABV, or 34 to 40 proof if you're listening from America. What's happening? How did we get to that proof? Well, the koji turned the starch in the rice into sugars, and the yeast fermented those sugars into alcohol, ethanol, and also burped out the byproduct of distillation, which is carbon dioxide. So yeast feed on sugar, create alcohol, and burp out carbon dioxide. But the koji is also creating tons and tons of compounds that contribute to a very deep, complex flavor. Then it's filtered and bottled, and that's sort of it. Like any spirit, there's a huge degree of subtlety in how you filter and to what degree you do. Do you cold filter? There's even a movement to have very lightly filtered sake, much like natural wine. All these options are out there for sake producers. But let's talk a little bit about shochu. Now, nobody is very sure how distilling knowledge actually came to Japan. Some people think that it came from China, which is a very compelling story. Some think that it came from Korea, and others think that it came from Thailand and other parts of Southeast Asia that are closer to the southwestern homelands of shochu, the Ryukyu Kingdom of Kyushu, all around Kagoshima, Nagasaki, Kumamoto, Oita, all those places. The first record we have of any spirit in Japan is actually from Portuguese travelers. The Portuguese really got along. And in 1546, a Portuguese traveler came to Japan and reported back that they drink there of the very strong araki. Now, we're almost certain he's talking about shochu. And the reason that Portuguese sailor said araki is he was, of course, referring to another spirit he had from very, very far away in Asia, which is to say arak from Indonesia. He didn't really mean that it tasted like arak. It was just his word to describe spirits. The first time we have a real written proof of the word shochu is in Japanese, and it's in 1559 at a shrine in Kagoshima. These two workmen had been hired to do repairs around the shrine, and they kind of left secret hidden graffiti behind saying, the priest here is so stingy, he wouldn't even give us any shochu. which is kind of cheeky of them, but it does give us a neat date, a birth date for shochu in Japan. And while we're looking at the map of Japan, which you can see here, it's important to point out that you can make shochu everywhere in Japan, and shochu is being made everywhere in Japan, but it tends to be thought of as the homeland region is the Kyushu region, which is the southwestern area around the Amami Islands, Okinawa, Kagoshima, Miyazaki, all those places where it's really tropical or subtropical, it's hot, and this is where the historical brands usually trace their history back to. How do you define shochu? Well, it's a Japanese distilled spirit made from barley, sweet potatoes, brown sugar, rice, or many other ingredients. How many other ingredients? Well, the answer is exactly lots, about 20. You can make it from buckwheat, the ingredient that's also used for soba noodles. You can make it from carrot or sesame or kelp, and each raw material contributes something different. However, let's just look at the numbers. Sweet potato shochu is 45% of all the shochu that is produced in Japan, and barley is the other 40%. So between sweet potato and barley, you're looking at 85% of all the shochu that's produced in Japan. The rest is predominantly rice. In third place is awamori. We'll give you the definition for awamori in a little bit, and buckwheat and all those other 17 or 18 different ingredients. But sweet potato, barley, and to a lesser degree rice constitute the vast majority of shochu that's made in Japan. So this spirit that you can make from many different ingredients is saccharified with our old mate koji, and the koji, as we said, converts starches into sugar and the yeast ferments the sugar into alcohol. But of course, the important thing about shochu is that it's distilled. Now, let's go through a couple of definitions of it. At the top of the tree is honkaku shochu. The term for honkaku shochu, which is single distilled pot still shochu, was otsurai in 1953, but it began to be generally accepted to call this pot still single distilled shochu honkaku shochu from 1971 onwards. The whole industry came together. It has to be bottled at 45% or less ABV. Typically, shochu in Japan is bottled at 25% ABV or less, although there are quite a few at around 40 to 45%. So honkaku shochu, single distilled, pot still. One type that you're less likely to see outside Japan is korowai shochu. Korowai is distilled in a column still. It's continually distilled, and it has to be bottled at less than 36% ABV. This tends to be inexpensive, and it also tends to be the basis for something you might have heard of called a chu hai, a shochu highball. These are commonly made in bars in Japan and Japanese bars abroad, and they're very often available as RTDs in cans or bottles. So this tends to be the chu in a chu hai, a shochu highball. So they might even be flavored. As I said, less common outside Japan because most of what's exported to places like England and America and Australia tends to be honkaku shochu. And there is a third category, again, not that common outside Japan, called blended shochu. So if you blend honkaku and korowai shochu, it's called konwa. And depending on how much honkaku shochu you have in there, it has a different name. So if it's more honkaku pot still shochu than korowai column still shochu, it's called otsurai korowai konwa. And if it's more column still korowai shochu and less honkaku pot still shochu, it's called korowai otsurai konwa. So that's enough of the language lesson today. And I apologize to any native Japanese speakers who have to listen to me mangling your language. It was very hard to find Japanese language options when I was growing up in Ireland. Now, some people think that you make shochu by just distilling sake, and that's a little bit simplistic. So let's just break down what has to be done. So first of all, you have to propagate the koji. So in order to do that, you get the koji kin, what it's going to live off. Let's say in this example, if you look at the screen, you can see rice. So you get the rice, you rinse it, you steam it, and then you inoculate it with koji. And you wait for the koji to grow until there's loads and loads and loads of koji. And it's nice and big and fluffy. It all grows at, remember, 36 degrees Celsius in a koji room. At the same time, you get your raw material and you clean it. So if it's sweet potatoes, you might chop them up a little bit. I once worked on a sweet potato production line for about an hour in a distillery in Japan with a load of 80-year-old women who absolutely blew me away. I was like the slow kid on the production line. They were chopping that sweet potato like nothing else. So you chop it up and then you steam that as well and you crush it up a little bit. Now, by then, the koji has propagated. And what you do with all that koji is you put it into the first fermentation, which is called the first moromi. The koji, together with yeast and water, starts getting itself hyped up, if you will. It goes into overdrive. It's waiting for the ingredient. And you let that primary moromi ferment for a while. And then you add in the base material, be it sweet potato or barley or rice or whatever. And the koji and the yeast go crazy. The koji feeds on the starch in the sweet potato, turns that starch into sugar. The yeast takes that sugar, turns it into alcohol, and the koji is also producing flavor compounds. It's producing citric acid. It's going bananas, right? So there's 2 fermentations that happen during shochu production. That's important. You can see somebody stirring the moromis there with a big long pole, which is also, by the way, one of the best ab exercises you can ever have. If you want to make $1 billion with the next CrossFit or Soul Cycle, invent exercise studios where you just have to stir the moromi every day. Now, once you have created something, some kind of a fermentation, shochu differs from sake, of course, in that you distill it. Now, distillation can be in a lot of different stills. We don't want to go too deep into it here, but for Honkaku shochu, of course, it's always pot stills. It's always a single distillation. They're very often stainless steel, which might surprise you. And starting in the 1950s, a lot of producers began distilling with reduced pressure stills. So vacuum stills to reduce the atmospheric pressure so that you can distill at a lower temperature, preserving a lot more of the flavor. Something like 1/3 of all the shochu that's made in Japan is distilled with these low pressure vacuum stills on a very large scale. Then you can rest or age the shochu if you wish, and then you bottle it and ship it out to thirsty people like me and Kenta. As you saw in the history section, shochu has been made for a very long time. There are still, if you can see this gorgeous photo, entirely wooden stills in operation, which require very old craftspeople who know the old ways to repair them. It's made with very, very tough, hard woods that can withstand distillation. But very commonly, since 1913, when stainless steel was invented, the stills tend to be made out of nice, shiny stainless steel. And that's very often what's used to rest or age the shochu after it's been distilled as well. So you can rest it in ceramics, traditional. You can do it in glass or stainless or wooden barrels. If you age shochu in wooden barrels, and I love this statistic so much, it doesn't matter how long you age it. What matters is the color that the shochu takes on. You're not allowed to age shochu past a certain depth of color because the Japanese authorities don't want there to be confusion between shochu and whiskey. So you're only allowed to have a certain depth of color for shochu that you age in wooden barrels. As I mentioned, it's usually bottled at it's usually bottled at 25% in Japan. There's no added sugar and no carbohydrates in shochu. So usually it's about 100 calories per 30 ml of 40% ABV spirit, for any spirit, vodka, gin, rum, whiskey. But shochu, because there's no carbohydrates in it, is lower. It has a lower GI, so it tends to come in at something like 75 to 80 calories per 30 ml. Please don't drink shochu to lose weight, but it's just a fact of this fascinating category. I did say we define awamori. Awamori is the OG, right? It is the mezcal to shochu, if you will. And it originated in the Ryukyu Islands, southwestern Japan, especially Okinawa. And it is a single fermentation. So they don't have two moromis. They put in the yeast, the koji, the water, and the base ingredients all in one go. Fermented all the way to about 40% after distillation. And it's always made with long grain Thai rice, indica rice, and it's always made with black koji. So it's always got tons of strength and funk to it. If you were looking at a screen right now, you would see a lot of the stainless steel tanks that are commonly used for resting shochu. It's always rested for usually at least 3 days, but it could be purposely rested for several years. The ceramics are historical, of course, ranging from small containers to very large ones, but there's another way to rest shochu as well. I'm kind of showing some photos of my vacation in Japan here. You can rest it in a cave, and there are shochu distilleries that will allow you to buy a bottle and store it in their aging cave, which is way, way deep down underground. There's even one aging cave of a shochu distillery, which is 14 levels underground in a former gold mine, and you enter it with a little train. If you're looking at the screen now, you can see loads of bottles of very, very old shochu that are being sitting in racks underground, and they've all got labels around the neck, and some of them have photos as well of babies or of married couples, because you buy a bottle of shochu from the distillery on a momentous occasion, like having a baby or getting married, maybe getting divorced, who knows? And the distillery will store it for you for as long as you like, and when you're ready, you can come back, go down the cave yourself, get the bottle out and drink it. Which is a very lovely tradition. Now, I'll just run through the basic serves of shochu before I hand over to Kenta to talk about advanced shochu and sake mixology. There is, of course, straight up or on the rocks, and the big hitters for shochu are mizuwari and oiwari, which is to say with water and hot. You can also mix it with soda, of course, or soda wari. But the mizuwari for shochu, especially when you pre-mix shochu with water and you let it sit and integrate for 24 hours or more, it is remarkable, as is the oiwari, especially with powerful, stronger shochu and awamori that have deep, complex flavors. Think of the oiwari as a toddy, but with nothing else, no sugar, no lemon, no cloves or anything like that. It really brings out the delicious flavor of these products to have them with water or with warm or hot water. And we could do a whole 40-minute presentation just on mizuwari or oiwari. But we're moving on, and I'm very glad to say you're going to have a break from listening to me, and we're going to talk to the man himself, the guy who has been a mainstay of mixology in New York City for what feels like decades. He's been making cocktails for me for far longer than any bartender should have to. So, Kenta, thanks for being so patient. Please take it away.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kenta Goto. I'm an owner of Bar Goto, Lower East Side, Manhattan, and Bar Goto Niban in Brooklyn. And we've been making cocktails with sake and shochu for long time. And when we make cocktails with sake and shochu, there are two things that we pay attention to. All right. Let's see. Oops. All right. Okay, so two things that we pay attention to. The first one is ABV, proof, and second one is flavors. But first, I want to get into proof, alcohol by the volume. And why I paid attention to proof, and that is because most of us bartenders create cocktails based on a recipe for standard cocktails. We use that as a starting point and create our own recipes. And what I noticed is that most recipe for classic cocktails utilize spirits of 40% ABV or even higher as the main ingredients. But in general, proof of sake and shochu are much lower. So we need to adjust our recipe. We just cannot simply swap the spirits with sake or shochu and stop right there. So what you want to do, and if you're looking at the screen, this is a common formula that is used in sour cocktails. Sour cocktails such as margarita, daiquiri, and gimlet. There is a booze, and there is a sour, there is sweet element. And those three get together and create sour type cocktails. Normally, typical formula for the sour cocktail will be 2 ounces of spirits and 3/4 ounce of sour ingredient and maybe 3/4 to 1 ounce of sweet ingredients. But if you are going to use sake or shochu as the main ingredients in your sour type cocktails, first, you want to increase overall quantity of sake and shochu as the main ingredients. So if you are putting 2 ounces of spirits, you want to replace 2.5 ounces, somewhere between 2 ounces and 2.5 ounces of sake and shochu. And while increasing the amount of alcohol, you're gonna decrease the amount of sour and sweet element. So if you are putting 3/4 ounce of sour, that could be reduced down to maybe 1 to 2 teaspoons only. And sweet element can be down to maybe 2 to 3 teaspoons. And now moving on to aromatic cocktails. And normally when we make old fashioned, we would mix 2 ounces spirits and 1/4 ounce of syrup. And if we make Manhattan, normally we would put 2 ounces of whiskey and 1 ounce of vermouth. But if you are using sake or shochu to make these aromatic type of cocktail, once again, what needs to happen is that we want to increase the overall quantity of alcohol of the main ingredients while reducing the modifier. So to make old-fashioned with sake or shochu, you want to increase the amount up to 2.5 ounces. And if you're going to make Manhattan, it's the same story. You're gonna put up to 2.5 ounces of sake or shochu to make Manhattan or old-fashioned. And modifier to make old-fashioned. So syrup can be reduced to 1 teaspoon to maybe 1.5 teaspoons. And vermouth can be also reduced or stay the same. It will be a half ounce to 1 ounce of vermouth. But point is that we're gonna increase the amount of alcohol of the main ingredients and reduce the modifier. And Philip went over sake. The polishing rate of the rice affect the whole flavors. And when you go to liquor store or work with your local distributors, I'm sure they can show you a wide variety of sake. And sake is generally less than 20% ABV, but because of the polishing rate and based on the koji that they use, there's so many wide variety of flavors and types. What it is very important is that you will find right type of sake and right type of spirits. So let's say you are making a martini with sake and gin. And the sake that is available to you happen to be, let's say, Junmai Daiginjo. Junmai Daiginjo is usually very gentle and has a hint of a fruity aroma and almost has a little like melon-ish flavor to it. And if you're gonna use Junmai Daiginjo to make martini with gin, what you wanna do is find the gin that is soft and gentle. So that works very well with the Junmai Daiginjo. But let's say if you have a sake that is more like bold and rich, like Namazake, or maybe Yamahai sake. If you are using those type of sake to make martini with gin, the gin you want to pick would be something bold and like traditional, like London dry type of gin. Also, good thing about using sake in cocktails is that even you make same cocktails, you can just introduce the same cocktail in 2 different temperatures. One can be icy cold, and one can be a warm and hot winter cocktail. And at Bar Goto, we have this sake martini, and we serve icy cold during the summertime. But once winter comes, we change the proportion a little bit to accommodate the temperature, and we serve same sake martini in a hot winter version. One of most selling sake cocktails that we have on our menu, we call it Far East Side. It's inspired by a South Side cocktail. South Side cocktail is, as you may know, it's gin mojito, one of the classic cocktails in United States. So we are making a sake mojito, and we are calling it Far East Side. And to make mojito, as you know, the main ingredient traditionally is rum. If you are making a South Side, it is gin. And both rum and gin is a 40% ABV. But now we are here using sake, which is less than 20% ABV. So we are utilizing the tweaked formula that I described earlier. We are increasing the amount of sake while reducing the sour and sweet. And moving on to shochu. Philip described shochu can be made from many different ingredients. And depends on which ingredient you use affect the flavors. And three major ingredients that we see in shochu production is rice as kome, and barley as mugi, and sweet potatoes as imo. And if you are creating a recipe or mixing spirits to make cocktails, it might be very easy to start mixing kome shochu with vodka, because kome shochu is typically very light and fragrant, and almost you get the hint of a sake aroma to it. And if you are using mugi, barley shochu, and when you try all different type of mugi shochu, I'm sure you will find some mugi shochu is very clean and light, while other mugi shochu is very toasty and nutty. And if you are using light, clean, gentle flavored mugi shochu, once again, it might be very easy to use vodka or perhaps gin as a starting point. But if you are mixing with very nutty and toasty mugi shochu, it might work very well with whiskey. And lastly, sweet potato shochu. This one, unlike kome or mugi shochu, imo shochu, sweet potato shochu, is very aromatic, earthy, and savory. And I often mix sweet potato shochu with tequila, or mezcal, or rum. And later I started discovering that imo shochu works very well with amaro too. And here we are introducing one of our popular cocktails, Oolong Sazerac. And we are using mugi shochu to replace whiskey and cognac, which we typically use to make Sazerac. But we are using mugi shochu, barley shochu. And this one, we use Ichiko silhouette, which is very gentle, light style of barley shochu, and it comes at 25% ABV. But since the shochu has very floral aroma, we are utilizing the fruity aroma to mix with the oolong tea. And so oolong tea infused mugi shochu as a base, and we're using a bit of cognac to give a backbone to the cocktail. And we are utilizing a tweaked shochu recipe. Once again, we are increasing the overall amount of alcohol up to 2.5 ounce. And we are using just only a quarter ounce of cane syrup. And if you are looking at screen, here is one of our shochu highball that we are selling. We are mixing with a sweet potato shochu and bit of mezcal together to make earthy, savory, but refreshing highball. So here's a recap of my talk. When you use sake or shochu as a main ingredient in your cocktails, what needs to happen is that we need to increase the overall amount of booze while reducing sour and sweet ingredients. Lately, we started seeing some shochu that is at 40% ABV. And if you are using those higher proof shochu, then simply we can apply classic cocktail recipe as a starting point. But as of today, majority of shochu available to you are around 25% ABV. So it is crucial to pay attention to the ABV to tweak your recipe. And sake, almost always, most of sake is at less than 20% ABV. So once again, it is very important that you pay attention to proof. The second thing is that here's a technical little advice that you can do is since the alcohol proof of main ingredients is very lower proof, so you need to be very gentle. And when we create cocktails that is sour type cocktail, our instinct as a bartender is to shake, to give aeration to the drink, to make a harmony between alcohol and sour and sweet ingredients. However, aeration from shaking can overwhelm the flavor of sake or shochu of 25% ABV. So what I recommend is that you make the same sake or shochu cocktail in two ways. One, you're gonna shake it. Other, you're gonna stir it, and you will just taste side by side to decide if it's gonna work with shaking or stirring. Another thing you can do is that, and if you are shaking your sake or shochu cocktails, perhaps you can shake all other ingredients except for sake or shochu first. Once you shake all other ingredients and you add sake and shochu to it. So you are basically just adding the undiluted sake or shochu so that the flavor of sake and shochu still can shine in your cocktail. So that is from me, and I'm gonna handing over to Philip.
I'm back. Hang on a second. I'll just turn up again. Well, this is really groundbreaking, Kenta, this new template that you have for mixing sake and shochu, because I think there's a lot of interest among bartenders around the world. Everybody loves Japan, Japanese bartending. They revere Japan, really. But they're not quite sure where or how to start making cocktails with it beyond the sort of silly stuff of the 1980s, the sake bombs and the lychee martinis. So how do you encourage people at your bars to experiment with sake and shochu?
First, just don't be afraid of just making lots of mistakes. And that's how I ended up tweaking a classic standard recipe into the recipe that works very well with the sake and shochu. But if you are visiting New York and stepping into Bar Goto, we can show you how we use sake and shochu in our cocktails. And based on the flavor we want to accomplish, we carefully choose which type of sake or maybe which type of shochu we use. And great thing about shochu is that, as Philip mentioned, based on the ingredients and also based on the koji, the flavor, the category of shochu can offer is enormous. So but then it's there's no textbook here. I just want to highly recommend to just try everything that you see, and you will start seeing your preference, and maybe you can take it from there.
Brilliant. Well, thanks very much, Kenta. And for anyone who's in New York, you should absolutely go to Bar Goto and its sibling, Bar Goto Niban in Brooklyn. If you aren't in New York, but you still want to stay in touch, please follow Kenta on Instagram. That's Kenta, Kenta _san, S-A-N. And the bars are at Bargoto, BARGOTO _NYC, and at Bargoto, BARGOTO _Niban, Niban. I hope to see you there, Kenta, for a drink one of these days. And absolutely everyone else, thank you for tuning in, watching, listening, and may all your shochu and sake cocktails turn out just as delicious as Kenta's always are. Cheers.
All right.